Season premieres usually feel like a reset, a pause, a moment to ease back in. This episode doesn't really do that. It doesn't restart the story. It doesn't raise the stakes. It doesn't announce a new direction. Instead, it quietly shows us where everything already stands. And that's what makes this episode 1 important. At the start of this episode, the journey simply continues. Frieren, Fern, and Stark are traveling north again. They talk about work, money, they talk about what they might do next, not as a plan, but more as something under consideration. The episode isn't trying to set up a mission yet, it's reestablishing the rhythm of this group. Within that calm, it places one small moment that tells us a lot about how things now work. In episode 1, Stark is offered another path. Weirbull invites him to join a different party. It's a genuine offer, not a joke, not a test. What matters is how the episode treats Stark's response. He answers quickly. He says he's with Frieren and Fern. There is no hesitation, no inner conflict shown on screen, no dramatic framing to sell the weight of the decision. The episode doesn't treat this as a crossroads, it treats it as confirmation. Stark isn't choosing in that moment, he's starting where he already belongs. The lack of emphasis is deliberate. His place in the group is stable enough that it doesn't need to be proven. The same stability is reinforced in the cave scene. When the group faces danger, Frieren tells Stark something very specific. If he wants to run, they'll run with him. This line is easy to misunderstand if you rush past it. It isn't encouragement, it isn't reassurance, and it isn't a test of courage. It's trust. Frieren makes it clear that a retreat is an acceptable decision, that fear doesn't disqualify Stark from standing at the front of the party. She removes pressure instead of adding it. Because of that, Stark stays where he is. Not because he's forced to be brave, but because he's comfortable being trusted. His position as the frontman isn't declared, it's quietly affirmed through action. That cave moment is followed by a flashback. We see Eisen from the past, admitting that he was afraid, that he wanted to run away when he was in his village back then. And we see how Himmel's party responded, or I should say Himmel. He didn't correct him, he didn't push him, he accepted him. And Freerun doesn't explain this connection out loud, she doesn't reflect on it verbally, but the parallel from the flashbacks is clear. She's offering Stark the same kind of trust she once saw given to Eisen. From a human perspective, this feels like nostalgia. But from an elf, from Freeren's perspective, it's something else. Humans experience patterns across years, and Freeren experiences them across lifetimes. So this isn't her remembering the past, it's her continuing it. This episode avoids turning any of this into a big moment. Stark's belonging isn't framed as growth, Freeren's trust isn't framed as wisdom, the group's unity isn't framed as an achievement. There is also no clear long term goal introduced. They discuss work, money, but apart from that, I guess nothing is really locked in. The episode refuses urgency, and that restraint matters. By not pushing the story forward, it shows us that the foundation is already solid. So, in conclusion, without much surprise, the episode 1 doesn't change the direction of the story, it tells us where everyone stands. Stark belongs here in the party, Frieren trusts without pressure, like Himmel did in their Himmel party days, and the journey continues at its own pace. Nothing is reset, the story simply settles back into itself, and I think that's great. An entire village disappears in a single night. The episode opens on a collapsed buildings and bodies left in the streets. There is no build-up, just aftermath. Stark stands alone in church, praying. When Genau asks if he's praying, Stark answers yes. Then he adds quietly, "The same thing happened to his village." The episode doesn't linger, it doesn't explain, it just shows what's left behind. And then, the episode before this spends 3 months opening a door for liquor. In episode 5, Frieren sits in a tavern with Stark and Fern. Stark overhears talk of Bowshaft, a rare liquor sealed behind a cave door. They reunite with Faz, a dwarf Frieren hasn't seen in 80 years. For him, it's been nearly a century. For her, just 8 decades. Faz asks for help opening the sealed door. The process will take 3 months. There's no strategic reason to do it, no larger objective, no urgency. Frieren initially declines. Stark and Fern argue that they should help anyway. She's surprised. Normally, they would be the first to call something like this a waste of time. Instead, they insist. On the surface, this episode looks like a detour, a side quest about alcohol. No combat, no major stakes, no dramatic turning point, just logistics. So why does the episode spend 3 months on something that doesn't matter? The key moment in this episode isn't the mine, it isn't the death, it's the refusal. When Faz asks for help opening the sealed door, Frieren says no. 3 months is too long. There is no urgency, no strategic reason to stay. And she's right. There is no larger objective tied to the liquor, no looming threat, no obligation forcing their hand. The logical choice would be to move on, but Stark and Fern interrupt. They argue that they should help anyway, and that's where the episode shifts. Frieren pauses. She points out that normally they would be the first to stop her from taking on something like this. In the past, they would have called it a waste of time, but they don't. They insist. That insistence matters more than the liquor, because this isn't about Bowshaft. It's about who decides how time is spent. Earlier in the series, Frieren treated time casually. Decades passed without weight, long stretches of her life slid by without urgency or reflection. Now, Stark and Fern are the ones choosing to stay, not because the outcome is important, but because the time itself is shared. And that's the first answer to our question. The episode doesn't waste time. It shows someone choosing how to spend it. Frieren's decision in this episode isn't impulsive. It echoes a conversation she once had with Heither. They were talking about liquor, about the possibility of spending a long time opening something, only to find out it wasn't very good. Frieren asked what would happen if they put in the effort, waited, committed to it, and the result was disappointing. Wouldn't that mean the time was wasted? Heither's answer was simple. Even if the liquor was bad, the time wouldn't be wasted, because they would have spent it together. That's the distinction episode 5 returns to. When Faz asks for help opening the sealed door, Frieren already suspects the Bowshafts might not live up to the legend. Or well, she knows, right? She knows from experience that sometimes the result isn't the point. The real risk isn't bad liquor, it's believing that time only matters if the outcome justifies it. Stark and Fern insist on helping anyway, and in that moment, Frieren recognizes something familiar. They aren't calculating whether it's worth it, they are choosing to stay. The episode reinforces that choice by stripping away urgency. There is no looming threat, no ticking clock, even the death subplot resolves quietly. Frieren works in the mine. She pays what she owes, time passes without spectacle, nothing dramatic happens, and that absence is deliberate. Episode 5 commits to the ordinary. It lingers in small actions. Sitting, waiting, working, eating. Because the point isn't the liquor behind the door, it's the time spent opening it. Earlier in the series, Frieren struggled to understand how limited human time is. Now the shift is subtle. She doesn't measure time by whether it leads to something impressive, she measures it by whether it's shared. The 3 months aren't meaningful because the reward is great, they are meaningful because they are chosen, and because no matter what's behind that door, they'll experience it together. After agreeing to help Faz, the episode introduces a second obstacle. Frieren's death resurfaces. Many years ago, she borrowed a large sum of money from the local trading authority and never repaid it. When she arrives, she is detained. It would be easy for this to become the episode's dramatic escalation, a confrontation, a chase, a clever solution. Instead, the episode does something quieter. Frieren works. She goes into the mine and extracts silver to repay what she owes. There is no spectacle in this sequence, no tension built around whether she'll escape or outsmart anyone. The problem isn't treated as urgent, it's procedural. Time passes, the debt is cleared, she walks back out. Even Stark and Fern, who appear worried outside, aren't reacting to a crisis. They're preparing for a possibility, ready to act if necessary. But the episode never turns that preparation into action. Nothing explodes, no one fights, no dramatic music swells to mark victory. The solution is simple because the episode isn't interested in escalation, it's interested in duration. By refusing urgency, first with the liquor, then with the debt, the episode reinforces its central idea. Not every stretch of time needs to justify itself through importance. Sometimes time is simply spent, and sometimes that's enough. And then episode 6 begins. Not with build-up, not with transition, with aftermath. The village is gone, homes are destroyed, bodies lie in the streets. Whatever happened here is already over. Genau and Method investigate the damage. They analyze the blade marks, trying to understand what kind of monster could have done this. Frieren, Stark and Fern arrive. There's no detour here, no 3-month commitment, no procedural waiting. Time wasn't chosen, it was taken. Stark kneels in a church and prays. When Genau asks if he's praying, Stark says yes. Then he adds that the same thing happened to his village. That line matters, because it quietly connects this massacre to something personal. In episode 5, the characters chose to stay for something trivial. In episode 6, an entire community never had that choice. Placed back to back, the contrast reframes what came before. The liquor wasn't important, the death wasn't important, but the time was intentional. Episode 5 shows time being spent, and episode 6 shows time being erased. That's why the quiet episode isn't empty, it's defining what can be lost. In conclusion, episode 5 doesn't move the plot forward. It doesn't introduce a new villain, it doesn't escalate the stakes, it doesn't resolve a major conflict. It spends 3 months opening a door for liquor, and that choice feels unnecessary, until episode 6 reminds us what unnecessary time looks like when it's gone. The village doesn't get 3 months. Stark's childhood village didn't get 3 months. They didn't choose how their time ended. That's the difference. Episode 5 isn't asking whether something is important enough to justify time, it's asking who gets to decide how time is spent. Frieren says yes to something trivial, not because it matters, but because she can choose it, and sometimes that's the only thing that makes time meaningful. During one of the battles in Frieren, a demon sets up a trap that should be impossible to avoid. In the middle of the fight, he sacrifices one of his own and turns her into something very specific, human child. And if you have watched enough stories like this, you can probably already predict what happens next, because humans are very predictable in moments like these.
If a child is in danger, someone will try to protect them.
And that's exactly what happens. Genau steps in to save the child, and the demon immediately takes advantage of that hesitation to strike. From a strategic perspective, the plan works perfectly. The demon correctly predicts the human reaction and uses it to gain the upper hand. But despite understanding exactly how humans behave, the demons still lose that fight. And once you start thinking about that moment, a strange question appears. If the demons can predict the humans so well, why do they still fail to understand them? The first hint of the answer actually appears the moment the trap is set, because in one sense, the demon is completely right about humans. The moment the child appears on the battlefield, Genau steps forward to protect her, exactly like the demon expected. And if you pause and look at that moment purely from a strategic point of view, it almost feels like an obvious mistake. The situation is suspicious, timing makes no sense, and in the middle of the fight against demons, something like this is almost guaranteed to be a trap. You might even expect someone like Genau to realize that immediately. After all, the episode goes out of its way to present him as the opposite of a compassionate hero. When he is first introduced to Method, he doesn't even acknowledge her handshake. He's blunt, unpleasant, and generally uninterested in social niceties. In other words, if anyone in this fight were going to ignore the bait and stay focused on the battle, Genau would probably be the safest bet. And yet, he still protects the child, even though the situation is suspicious, even though he understands it could easily be a trap. And after the attack lands, he even admits it himself. He says he shouldn't have acted out of character. That line is easy to overlook in the middle of the fight, but it reveals something important about the moment you just watched, because the demon predicted the human reaction perfectly. The child appears in danger, and a human steps in to protect them. But predicting the reaction isn't the same thing as understanding it, and that difference turns out to be the real problem for demons throughout this battle. From the demon's perspective, this moment proves that humans are irrational. Their instincts can be manipulated, their empathy can be exploited. But from the human perspective, protecting the child was never really a calculation in the first place. It's simply the kind of things humans do. And the strange part is, moments like this keep confusing the demons throughout the battle. In fact, at one point, one of them asks a question that sounds almost absurd from their perspective. Why do humans protect the graves of the dead? That question might sound strange at first, but if you pause for a moment and try to look at the situation from the demon's perspective, it actually starts to make a lot of sense. Why do humans protect the graves of the dead? The people buried there are already gone. They gain nothing from being protected. And from a purely practical standpoint, defending a place like that doesn't really provide any advantage. If you were approaching the world the way demons do, focusing only on outcomes and efficiency, the whole idea would probably seem completely pointless. And what's interesting about this moment is that the demon asking the question doesn't sound like she's mocking humans. She actually sounds curious, almost like she's trying to understand something that doesn't quite fit into the way demons normally think. But before that curiosity can go any further, Revolt shuts the conversation down immediately. According to him, understanding humans isn't important, as long as their behavior can be predicted, it can be exploited. And if you think back to the trap with the child earlier that I mentioned, that philosophy explains the entire strategy. The demon doesn't need to understand why a human would protect a child. It's enough to know that they will. But if you look closely, this way of thinking also reveals the real limitation of the demons, because by refusing to understand the meaning behind the human actions, they end up misunderstanding those actions entirely. Protecting a grave might look irrational if you are only thinking about efficiency, but for humans, actions like that aren't really about efficiency at all. They're about memory, about respect, about the idea that the people who came before you still matter, even after they are gone. And once you start looking at the battle through that perspective, the earlier moment with Ganao starts to make a lot more sense too. Because protecting the child wasn't just a mistake or a lapse in judgment, it was a reflection of the same human impulse, the instinct to protect things that carry meaning, even when doing so isn't the most logical choice. And the more the battle continues, the clearer it becomes that this difference between humans and demons goes far beyond a single moment. Because when Revolt resumes the fight, he makes another assumption about humans, one that turns out to be just as dangerous. And as the battle continues, that misunderstanding starts appearing in other ways as well. When the fight between Revolt, Genau, and Stark resumes, the demon makes another confident assumption about humans, one that ends up revealing the same flaw in his thinking. During the fight, Stark and Genau manage to disarm him, but instead of backing down, Revolt simply keeps attacking with his bare hands, and while doing so, he mocks the humans for something he believes they've misunderstood. According to him, humans tend to think that weapons are limited to the arms someone carries, swords, spears, magic, but demons know better than that. Even without a weapon, their bodies can still be used to kill. To Revolt, that assumption is the human's fatal mistake. And if you're watching the fight in that moment, you might actually think he has a point. Despite losing his weapon, the demon continues to push forward relentlessly, and the situation quickly becomes desperate for the humans. But what Revolt fails to understand is that he's making a mistake of his own. Because while demons tend to focus on advantages like strength, weapons, and tactics, they consistently underestimate something much harder to measure: human persistence. Even when the situation looks hopeless, even when they are exhausted, even when they are clearly outmatched, humans keep fighting. And in this case, that stubborn persistence becomes the thing that finally turns the battle around. Stark refuses to give up the fight, and together with Genau, they manage to defeat Revolt before collapsing from exhaustion themselves. From the demon's perspective, the fight should have ended much earlier. The humans were injured, the situation was desperate, but humans don't always stop fighting just because the odds say they should. And once you start noticing that pattern, something interesting begins to emerge across the entire battle. Again and again, the demons correctly predict what humans will do, but they misunderstand the reasons behind those actions. And if you look closely, there is actually one more moment in the fight that captures that difference perfectly. While Stark and Genau are struggling against the revolt, another fight is happening nearby. This time, Fern is the one facing the demons, but the battlefield is covered in magical fog, which makes the situation much more dangerous than it might seem at first. Without clear visibility, every spell becomes harder to read, every attack harder to anticipate. And if you think about it from the demon's perspective, this is exactly the kind of advantage they rely on. Control the environment, limit your opponent's information, and force them to fight under conditions that favor you. At the same time, something interesting is happening on Frieren's side of the battlefield. Instead of stepping in immediately, Frieren simply watches the fight unfold. And if you're watching that moment for the first time, you might even wonder why she isn't interfering. After all, Frieren is easily powerful enough to end the fight herself, even if she isn't the first class mage. But instead, she lets Fern handle it. And that decision turns out to be completely intentional. Because once Methode clears the fog, Fern immediately takes control of the fight and overwhelms the demons with precise, long-range magic. The shift happens almost instantly. What looked like a difficult situation suddenly becomes a decisive victory. And if you think about how that moment unfolds, it highlights another part of human behavior that demons struggle to account for. Humans don't just rely on their own strength, they rely on each other. Frieren trusts Fern to handle the fight. Methode creates the opening that makes that possible, and Fern delivers the attack that ends it. From the demon's perspective, that kind of reliance might look like a weakness, depending on someone else means giving up control. But in practice, that trust is exactly what allows humans to overcome situations that should be impossible for them individually. And by the time the battle finally ends, you can start to see a pattern forming across all of these moments. Again and again, the demons correctly predict what humans will do, but they misunderstand the reasons behind those actions. And that misunderstanding keeps leading them to the wrong conclusions, which brings us back to the question we started with. So by the end of the battle, the question we started with begins to answer itself. If demons can predict humans so well, why do they still fail to understand them? And if you look back at the moments we just walked through, the pattern becomes surprisingly clear. The demons are actually very good at predicting human behavior. They know a human will try to save a child. They know humans defend places that don't seem strategically valuable. They know humans continue fighting even when the situation looks hopeless. But what they consistently fail to understand is the reason behind those actions. Because demons approach the world through logic, efficiency, and advantage. From that perspective, protecting a grave has no value. Saving a child in the middle of a battle is irrational. Continuing a fight when you have already been injured is simply inefficient. But humans don't make decisions based purely on efficiency. They act on empathy, on memory, on stubborn persistence, and on trust in the people fighting beside them. And interestingly, the demons don't just misunderstand these motivations, they dismiss them entirely. Revolt even says it directly during the battle. Understanding humans isn't important as long as their behavior can be predicted. It can be exploited. But that assumption turns out to be the demon's real weakness, because predicting what someone will do isn't the same as understanding why they do it. And that difference between prediction and understanding is exactly what separates humans and demons in Frieren. The demons can observe human behavior, they can imitate human speech, they can even predict human reactions, but the meaning behind those reactions, the empathy, the memories, and the values that guide human choices is something they never truly grasp. And because of that, the demons in Frieren will always be able to watch humans without ever really understanding them. A village is in ruins, dragons tore through it, people are displaced, scared, desperate, and Frieren, the most powerful mage alive, someone who has watched civilizations rise and fall, is standing in the middle of it all, staring at a grimoire that teaches you how to say tongue twisters without messing up. She takes it. Of course she does. And somehow that moment tells you more about who Frieren is than any fight scene ever could. Episode 9 of Frieren Season 2 is one of those episodes that's almost impossible to explain to someone who doesn't watch the show. Nothing huge happens. There is a dragon fight, sure, but it's over in minutes. There is no major revelation, no cliffhanger that changes everything. The episode just moves through moments. A snowstorm, a port town, a borrowed boat, a book, and yet by the end of it, I was sitting there genuinely moved. So what is this show doing? Why does an episode with almost no plot feel like it matters so much? I think it comes down to one thing, and it starts with a dead man's philosophy about money. When Frieren arrives at the destroyed village, she tells the villagers up front, "We only help if you pay us." Fern clearly finds this uncomfortable, because you would expect the hero, or whatever Frieren is, to just help people. That's what Himmel would have done, right? He was kind, warm, the type of person people wrote songs about. Except that's not quite right. Fern assumed Himmel was above payment, that he helped out of pure goodness, no strings attached. And Frieren shuts that down immediately. She asks, "You think Himmel didn't ask for payment?" So we get the flashback, and what Himmel says is quietly one of the most interesting things this show has ever put in his mouth. He says, "If you let people owe you, you haven't really helped them. They'll spend the rest of their lives feeling like they're in debt to you. The help becomes a burden. But if they pay, even a small amount, even something worthless, the transaction is clean. They are free. You help them, and they owe you nothing." Think about what that means for a second. Himmel wasn't just being generous, he was being precise about generosity. He understood that genuine help has to come without a leash. The moment someone feels like they owe you their gratitude forever, your kindness has become a form of control, even if you never intended it. So Frieren, even 100 years later, still follows this rule. Not because she is cold, not because she's transactional, but because she's carrying forward the most important thing Himmel ever taught her: how to give something to someone and truly let it go. And then the village pays her with a useless tongue twister grimoire, and she takes it without hesitation. Here is where I want to slow down, because I think this moment is doing more work than it looks like. Fern's expression when Frieren picks it up is perfect, pure disbelief. They just saved the village from dragons, and this woman is delighted about a spell that serves absolutely no purpose. Stark then praises her magic during a scene, genuinely, sincerely, and Frieren lights up. She wants more. She's practically fishing for compliments. And Fern, completely deadpan, says, "Don't praise her too much. It's bad for her development." It's funny, but it's also kind of the whole show in one exchange. Frieren has lived for centuries. She's witnessed the end of demon lords, the death of heroes, the slow erosion of everything she has ever known, and what genuinely delights her is a spell that helps you say tongue twisters, and a 20-year-old telling her she did good. She's not detached, she's not cold, She's just oriented differently than you would expect. The things that move her aren't the grand ones, they are the small, specific, almost embarrassing ones. And the show keeps proving this is not a flaw, it's who she is. There is a flashback in this episode that I think a lot of people might have let wash over them, but it's worth sitting with. The original party, Frieren, Himmel, Pyther, Tyson, are stuck inside during a heavy rainstorm. They can't move, they are just waiting it out. Everyone's bored, restless, and Himmel says something like, "Adventure isn't only about the good days when you're out there exploring, it's also the crappy days when you are stuck inside doing nothing." It sounds like a throwaway motivational line, but the episode immediately cuts to Frieren, Fern, and Stark in a brutal snowstorm at a port town, completely stranded, just adapting. Stark eating food with a local in freezing conditions, everyone figuring out how to pass the time. The show is saying, this is also the adventure, this is also the story. And that matters because most fantasy stories, most stories honestly, treat the downtime as the stuff between the real moments, the filler, the breather before the next big thing. Frieren keeps insisting that's wrong. The boring days are not the gap between the memories, they are the memories. The texture of a life isn't made of its highlight, it's made of every ordinary Tuesday that you almost forgot. Which brings us to the journal. Frieren doesn't have money for the boat crossing because she spent it all on grimoires, obviously. So instead they make a deal. They'll retrieve something from a nearby island where Himmel's personal memoirs are sealed behind the barrier. And when they find the book, Frieren recognizes his handwriting immediately. That detail alone is something. She has lived centuries, she has seen so much, but she knows his handwriting on sight. She reads it and we see it through her eyes. And what's in the journal isn't what you might expect. No grand reflections on destiny, no heroic declarations, just their days together. The group, the small moments, what they ate, what they argued about, what made them laugh. The ordinary life of an extraordinary journey, recorded like it was worth keeping. And then she reaches the end of what he wrote, blank pages. The music swells, and look, I'll be honest, the orchestra here is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and it absolutely earns it. And Frieren looks up at his statue and smiles. Fern asks what the journal is about. Frieren says, just everyday stuff from our adventure. That's it, that's the whole thing. The man who taught her that true kindness leaves no debt, who told her that the boring days inside during the rain are part of the adventure too, he proved it with his own life. He kept a record not of the heroic moments, but of the mundane ones, because those were the ones worth remembering. And the blank pages aren't sad, exactly. They're just the shape of an ending. He ran out of days before he ran out of pages. But what's there, what he chose to write down, is everything Frieren has been quietly learning to value. The guy who helped them cross the lake recognizes who she is and lets her keep the book. Of course he does. The episode ends with a Kraken grabbing Frieren and repeatedly pulling her underwater while she tries to calmly instruct the group on how to defeat it, getting cut off every time she gets dunked. Stark is kind of losing his mind, Fern is calm, Frieren is calm. It's funny, it's also, if you've been paying attention, kind of the thesis statement in action. Even in chaos, Frieren treats everything like just another moment. Not because she doesn't care, but because she has spent enough ordinary Tuesdays with people she loved to know that even this, even getting dragged underwater by a sea monster, is just part of it. Another day, another memory worth keeping. Maybe. Season 2 has one episode left, and I don't know exactly how it will end, but I know that whatever happens, Frieren will probably find a useless spell somewhere along the way and be completely delighted about it. And honestly, same. Season finales in most anime are crescendo. A final boss, world-ending threat, massive revelation that makes you question everything that came before it. Frieren ends its second season with a spell that lets you flip pancakes perfectly. And honestly, that's exactly right. Because this show has never been about the crescendo, it's about the road. The rhythm of people who have been traveling together long enough that they don't need to prove anything to each other anymore. They just need to keep moving. But if you watch this finale closely, you'll notice something. While Frieren is busy negotiating for useless grimoires, the world around her is being quietly rebuilt by the ghost of a man who has been dead for 80 years. Today, we are talking about the architecture of legacy, what gets left behind, what takes 200 years to finish, and why the boring stuff is actually the foundation everything else is built on. The first half of the episode gives us Gan, a dwarf who has spent 200 years building a single bridge across the Thor Canyon, one of the deepest canyons on the continent, 3,000 meters down, winds so strong you can't fly across it. 2 centuries, multiple human lifetimes for one bridge. And Stark asks the question we are all thinking. Why? The answer is regret. Gan's village was destroyed by demons because the armies stationed across the canyon couldn't get there in time, or rather at all. No bridge meant no reinforcements meant no village. He's not building this for glory, he's building it so that a specific tragedy can never happen to anyone else again. And here's the twist the show slips in quietly. Gan didn't start this alone. In a flashback, we see Himmel handing over his reward money, actual gold from defeating a demon noble, to fund the construction. Gan pushes back. You won't live to see it finished. And Himmel just smiles and tells him that's fine. Frieren will collect the repayment instead. Think about that. Himmel made a promise on behalf of someone else across a timeline he knew he would never see. To a project he knew he would never witness completed. That's not optimism. That's architecture. He wasn't building the bridge. He was building the conditions for the bridge to exist. And 200 years later, there it is. There is a beat when the party crosses into the town on the other side and Gan is greeted like a local hero by people who weren't even born when he started. He says it simply, 200 years is more than enough time for a village to be built anew. And Frieren smiles, which, if you've been watching this show, you know means something. After the bridge, the party heads further north. Broke because Frieren spent everything on more magical junk and picks up a job in the Schmel snowfields hunting a wolf creature that's been blocking a holy snow crystal deposit. The fight that follows is one of my favorite action sequences of the season, not because it's the biggest, it isn't, but because of what it shows about how this party actually works now. The wolf tracks mana, so Fern steps completely outside its detection range and hits it from a distance it can't perceive. Stark holds the line with Frieren's barrier magic covering him, while Fern sets up the shot. No dramatic speeches, no last-minute power-ups, just 3 people who know each other well enough to move like one unit. This is what months of travel together actually looks like, not a bond that gets announced, one that gets demonstrated. When a second wave shows up and the local patrol arrives to help, Frieren takes a quiet moment to note how much the Northern Plateau has changed. It's becoming the kind of place where people can live, not just survive. The era Himmel dreamed of is becoming real. Incrementally, in places like this, snowfields that used to be too dangerous for anyone to bother guarding. Then comes the scene that gives the episode its title. Frieren and Himmel stood in this exact spot once, on their way north during the original journey. Back then, Himmel said, "When the Demon King is gone, anyone will be able to see this." They were there for a side quest reward, the view was a bonus. Cut to the present, the same sight, and Frieren notes, quietly, almost to herself, how strange it is. People can see it now, and the first thing they want to do is put up barriers and restrict access to monetize the crystal deposits. It's the most human thing in the episode, and it lands somewhere between funny and sad. Progress doesn't protect beauty. Sometimes it just finds new ways to fence it off. But the show doesn't let that sit as cynicism. The adventurer who hired them steps in and says that seeing this sight was what made him want to become an adventurer in the first place. He wanted to protect his homeland, not because it's profitable, because it's his. And that unlocks something for Fern and Stark. Fern realizes that Hyther probably did the same for her, protected something she couldn't protect herself, so she could keep her memories of her family even after losing her home. Stark connects it to the encouragement Fern always gives him, the kind that kept him from running when he had every reason to. Then Stark asks Fern why why she always does that, be encouraging, why she keeps pushing him. And Fern says, because that's what Mrs. Frieren would do. That line is the thesis of the entire season dressed up as a throwaway answer. All of season 2, the phrase has been, because it's what Himmel would have done. That's been Frieren's justification for every act of quiet heroism, every bad payment accepted, every detour taken for someone else's sake. Now it's mutated. Fern never met Himmel. She has no memory of him as a person, only the stories, the statues, the legends. What she has is Frieren. And Frieren, without noticing, without trying, has become the thing that Himmel was. The person whose behavior is worth emulating. The standard someone else holds themselves to. Himmel built the bridge. Frieren became the bridge. Before the credits, we get a montage of everyone the party held this season. Snowfields, the villages, the Himmel statue from the very first episode. A quiet loop that closes the season without making a big deal of closing anything. Fern hid half the travel funds because she knew Frieren would spend it on something useless. Frieren finds out and praises her for it, which is, in its own way, the funniest and most touching moment of the episode. She's not annoyed, she's proud. That's family. And then the tone shifts. In post-credits, Denken, first-class mage, someone who we have seen operate with total composure all season, is heading into what everyone around him quietly acknowledges is a suicide mission. His destination is the Golden Land, his hometown, transformed into a city of literal gold by Mach, the last and strongest of the 7 Sages of Destruction, the final demon, the one that wasn't there to be defeated alongside the Demon King. Edel transfers the mission briefing directly into his memory. Denken doesn't flinch, and the detail that sticks with me, he isn't going there just to fight. He wants to visit a grave. That's the reason underneath the reason. Not duty, not glory, something personal and quiet and very human. In that way, Denken is the perfect bridge into season 3, because that's what this whole season has been about. People doing enormous things for reasons that are actually very small, very specific, someone they loved, a village that doesn't exist anymore, a view they want other people to be able to see. Shall we go? That's how season 2 ends. Not a goodbye, not a resolution, just the next step on a road that was never going to end neatly. Season 3 is confirmed for October 2027, which, depending on your perspective, is either a long wait or, in the other words of a certain dwarf, more than enough time for something to be built. Himmel's foundation is still holding, the bridge is still standing, the crystals are still catching the light at sunrise, and somewhere out there, a pancake is being flipped perfectly. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this season and through all the videos. I hope you've enjoyed this journey. I certainly did. This was one of my most favorite series to do, and you, the viewers, have played a big part in that, taking part in the discussion, in the comments, everybody sharing their opinions, their perspectives. I feel like there is always so much to take away from the episodes themselves that sometimes you get blindsided and you don't see everything. And that's where you really help me see more than I initially saw in the episode, if that makes sense. So thank you once more, and well, hopefully we will see each other next year with another Frieren season. I'm really excited, so see you soon.